start. Apologies for the slightly delayed start, but we had a couple of things we needed to sort out before we got going. My great pleasure to welcome you to the Center for International Policy Studies. My name is Rita Abrahams, and I'm the director of CIPS. And today, I'm exceptionally pleased to be able to welcome David Moore. Many of you will know David, both personally and from his work. He is a professor in the Department of Anthropology and Development Studies at the University of Johannesburg. He's originally from Canada with a PhD from York University in Toronto, and has worked in a lot of different universities over the years. Several years at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in Durban, and then now at the University of Johannesburg. He's written extensively on a whole range of different topics in African politics and development studies, development theory. It's hard to have a conversation with David without talking about hegemony. He's written a lot about hegemony, about democracy, but he's probably most of all known for his work on Zimbabwe. Zimbabwean politics, the political economy of Zimbabwean development, and so forth. So he has followed developments in politics in Zimbabwe for, he does say on his website, 30 years, so I dare to quote that
Come
here.
backwards.
He's currently writing a book manuscript with the very intriguing title, From Comrades to Coups, Robert Mugabe, ZANU-PF and their Zimbabwe. So I think if we're really lucky today, we may get some advanced insights into what that manuscript will argue. But the title of his talk today is Zimbabwe After Mugabe. So that's certainly one of the hot topics on the African continent at the moment, and also I think for quite a considerable period to come. So without any long introduction, we all know you, your work on Zimbabwe. We very much look forward to what you have to say. David will talk for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we will have our usual SIPS discussion and questions and answers. So, David?
Right. Thank you, Rita. It was a good introduction, wasn't it? To deserve the applause. If you don't mind, I'm going to walk around. And I think there's a few people here, so we could be relatively casual. If people want to interrupt me and ask a question as clarification, say, whoa, stop here, I haven't quite figured this out. I think that would be fine, wouldn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm taking your role here. So I came here to celebrate Linda Freeman's retirement. So I went to Carlton last week, 24 hours late, thanks to a plane that didn't take off on time. You know, Linda, she died in 1977. So I can sort of make another accolade for Linda. If it wasn't for Linda, I probably wouldn't be here. So what I'm going to do here is do a little bit of what I did at Carleton, which was basically just talk about the coup. Didn't talk much about after the coup. But I think I had to talk about the coup in order to give you a sense of the players and the context. And of course, much of what happens after the coup is conditioned by the coup. So you can't really understand what's going on without looking at the coup. So this is largely based on an article I just submitted early last week to the Journal of the Southern Africa called Transformation, which has a long and glorious history of left-wing scholarship. And so I call that article a very Zimbabwean coup, because as you might know, there's a huge discussion about whether that thing was really a coup. Of course, the regime says it wasn't. The American Catholic magazine, called The American Catholic, in an interview with the priest who was called into the big blue roof mansion to negotiate the transition, and to negotiate Mugabe's retirement, the American Catholic magazine called it an unexpected but peaceful transition. And I've called it a con coup. Anyway, it was a coup. There was violence. There were tanks. There was maybe 2 to 20 people killed. peaceful. The kids are going to school in front of an armed personnel carrier. Many of the commentators on the journalists who reported on that were very angry because the journalists said, the tanks are in the streets. And I was receiving messages, WhatsApps and so on the 14th or 15th, I think. And people were saying, no, it's just ordinary exercises, nothing to worry about. Things are going along as planned. So let's call it a very Zimbabwean coup. And in case I forget, when everybody celebrates South African democracy and how this peaceful transition from Zuma to Ramaphosa went on, let's not forget that probably 100 people were killed in intra-party violence in the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal in the past year, from about April to the end of last year. So, maybe coups aren't such a bad idea. What's all this business about democracy? Before I get on to the coup, there's quite a few rests and pieces that we have to do. And by the way, I got a fake news item last night at about 11 o'clock. Mugabe's dead. From Glow News. But I didn't see it confirmed anywhere. And then I was looking back to the trail of Google messages which had been involved in discussions about Mugabe's death. There was one, May 13, 2017. Mugabe's dead. There have been many rumors about Mugabe's death recently. Morgan Tsvangirai, you can say there is an important player in why this coup came about. In the late 1990s, a whole social movement of trade unions, social movements, intellectuals from the universities, human rights activists, economic justice activists, the National Constitutional Assembly, all came together in February '99 and had a working people's convention, decided that you should have a working people's party, and Morgan Tsvangirai, the leader of the trade union, which had successfully pulled away from its umbilical cord with ZANU, became the leader of the new party, the Movement for Democratic Change. Many people have told me that Robert Mugabe considered retiring at the end of 1998. But he and his advisors were convinced not to because this threat was on the doorstep. And I think there's a whole sentiment, at least it's my pretty firm belief, that après Mugabe, la deluge. ZANU-PF can't stick together without him. And I think, I don't know when I first thought that, but certainly it's been through many, many internal eruptions in ZANU since 1974, 75, 77, all in that period. Mugabe, after 77, managed to keep it all together through his manipulation of ethnic, ideological, generational, military, civilian tensions. He was pretty good at that. Although he ruined the economy along the way. I think it was Trotsky who said sometimes good politics makes bad economics. Anyway, let Morgan Tsvangirai rest in peace. I wrote an obituary about him, and that's why Rita found out that I was going to Ottawa. The obituary was a bit too kind, but obituaries are supposed to be kind. And Roy Bennett, rest in peace. Roy Bennett symbolizes in many ways the perhaps transformation of the MDC. White farmers figured they were going to lose their farms because this is around the same time when the war veterans in Zim had made a deal with Mugabe. We'll kind of help keep you in power if you push the land reform fast and give us all sorts of pensions. That scared the white farmers. The white farmers joined the MDC, and Mugabe was able to label the MDC as a white-run party, puppet of the imperialists and so on. Roy Bennett was also very good at getting money. You know how he died? He died in a helicopter with a very, very, very rich man in Montana or something going to the guy's ranch. So there was lots of money coming in through Roy Bennett. But he also symbolized not just that cynical approach, but a multiracial party. It was a continuation of a multiracial stream in Southern African politics, which goes from the ANC to ZANU and to the human rights activists and so on. So he died a little bit before Tsvangirai. Anyway, I got into the sort of RIP mode, so let Robert Mugabe retire in peace. But he's not. So we're not even really talking about Zimbabwe after Mugabe. Because a few weeks ago, he hosted the chairman of the AU and made all this complaining about Mnangagwa being an illegal coup maker and blah, 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 blah. Choice Majuro, the political players, and now there's a new party that started yesterday. And they went to Robert Mugabe to hear his implanature. So maybe we got to change the title of our topic. And there he was on his 94th birthday, looking quite satisfied. Otherwise, Grace is not satisfied. And of course, we have to talk more about Grace later. But apparently, Grace was feeding him all the information to the chairman of the AU, you know, saying, no, remember, this was unconstitutional. No, remember, Mnangagwa was a coup maker. Emerson Ngwenda, which means the crocodile. Why is he called the crocodile? Because he's very sly, he looked kind of sleepy, he says prayers with one eye open, but he'll snap very quickly. But he's also called the crocodile because the crocodile was the first ZANU military foray, crocodile gang, second military foray into Zimbabwe, into Rhodesia back in 63 or 64. He was put in prison, they were all captured, but he was released from prison because he was under 18. And he doesn't have a birth certificate. So I don't know if he made a deal to get out. And this suspicion has been around Mnangagwa all his ZANU-PF life. And he knows it. People think he was working for the Rhodesians, for the British. Now how do you manage to live in a political environment where people think you're a spy? Right? So this makes you very cautious, very, very prone to lie, prone to paranoia, prone to sneakiness, prone to good politics. Now there's a guy, Constantino Chiwenga, who changed his name in about 2006 from Constantine Chiwenga to Constantino Chiwenga. He has a penchant for Italian mansions and Italian mustaches, as you can see. He led the coup. Mnangagwa, and I'll explain to you why Mnangagwa was kicked out. He was vice president. He was kicked out of the country early November. Where was he? China? London? Talking with his British masters, people would say. Or South Africa. He was in South Africa. He was in the Michelangelo Hotel. Talking to Zuma and Becky and so on. So Chiwenga had to do the coup while Mnangagwa was outside of the country. Right? So I'll just go into after now, because there's tension between the military led by Chiwenga and the civilians led by Mnangagwa. Even though he was Minister of Defense and Minister of Security in 1980, he managed with the British and the Rhodesians to transition from Lancaster House, end of December 1979, to the first year until elections in April 1980. Mnangagwa and the British and the Rhodesians managed the security transition. And they're very close. I interviewed the former head of the security service, whatever, a big shot in the Rhodesian security forces who worked with Mnangagwa in the 1980s, and he worshipped him. This was in 2014. Chiwenga, ethnic politics. Chiwenga is not Karenga. You'll see where people start putting the ethnic slant on everything. Mnangagwa was Karenga. Chiwenga is not. He's a Zulu. Chiwenga was quite close to Mugabe and kept approaching Mugabe as this turmoil I'll be telling you about in a few seconds was mounting. Chiwenga would go to Mugabe and say, look, we've got to do something about this other faction. This is an intra-party coup we're talking about, okay? I'll show you the other members of the factions in a couple of seconds. So Chiwenga, how close is the military to Mnangagwa? So is he going to reconquer? Okay, there's a poster child of the Zimbabwean Revolution. And this is where I can start to talk about the two factions in ZANU-PF, which led the faction fight, which finally led to this coup. So Grace Mugabe, the 52 or 53-year-old partner of Robert Mugabe, who is now 94, becomes a political actor in her own right. There's an interesting feminist analysis of this whole moment. So she's associated with what they call G40, Generation 40. Generation is another issue which is important here. So Generation 40, led by Professor Jonathan Moyo. Can we have more rhetoric in these? So Professor Jonathan Moyo was a liberal academic at the University of Zimbabwe in the 90s. Got involved in a bit of corruption. Went to Kenya to lead the Ford Foundation in Kenya. Got involved in a bit of corruption. Went to Wits University and led a 50 million rand project on the futures of Africa, which he never used. And then in 1999, he became the media manager for the constitutional reform that was going on in Zimbabwe. And in 2000, he was a campaign manager for the election that MDC was running. Okay? And his problems with, I guess you could say, the military faction of well, with ZANU-PF as a whole, started at least as far back as 2004, when he and Emerson Mnangagwa made a declaration in advance of a party congress saying that Emerson Mnangagwa should be the vice president. They got caught out, and they fell out, and the two of them were thrown out of politics for a while, but they all got together. Anyway, so Jonathan Moyo became Minister of Information, Minister of Higher Education, and de facto in charge of the CIO, which is the Central Intelligence Organization, which is the intelligence organization in Zimbabwe. So as we're coming up to 2016, he's got intelligence wrapped up, he's got information wrapped up, he's got education wrapped up. So he thinks. Okay. 2016, early 2016, we see the emergence of the faction fighting within ZANU-PF. Chris Mugabe was involved in the guerrilla war in Mozambique, in the camps. He became later ambassador to China. 2016, he's the cabinet minister, the minister for Veterans Affairs. And so he's one of the leaders of the second faction. And Mnangagwa is the leader, called Lacoste. Who's got a Lacoste shirt on? It's French for crocodile, right? So the Crocodiles faction is Lacoste faction. And Chris Mugabe is the leader of the war veterans. So here's a third faction within the faction which has won the coup. All right? So you've got the war veterans who are generally unstriped soldiers, and they're not very well off, most of them. They're living on these pensions that they gained in 1997, but they've always been a real factor in ZANU politics, as far back as the 1980s. But I especially remember in 1997 when they were awarded their pensions, and Mugabe told them they could have 20% of the land that was taken. And so the land started to be taken in 2000, before the general election in 2001. So you had this massive invasion of white-owned large commercial farms, probably about 1,400 of them, and there's no longer such a thing as private property. There's money spent on the DRC war, which Zimbabwe was involved in, supporting Laurent Kabila in the hopes that they would get paid off later with lots of mines. So they were spending $1 million a day on that war. So this was a perfect storm. Everything was crashing around 2000. New opposition party, fast-track land reform, destroying agricultural production, and the huge inflationary cycle begins, which Roger Saffold writes about very well in the latest edition of the Canadian Journal of African Studies. Hyperinflation by 2008 is absurd. So, there's your leader of the war veterans who in early 2016 demonstrate against the G40 faction, the Grace Mugabe, the Jonathan Moyles, and the water cannons come out and they're sprayed with water cannons and they're falling down all over the place, and this goes on and on. So that's really, I think, the opening, the most visible opening of this coup, February 2016. I was in Bulawayo at the time. This guy is a war veteran from the other party that was always part of the nationalist movement in Zimbabwe, the ZAPU, led by Joshua Nkomo. Grace Mugabe was a leader of the ZIPRA war veterans based in Bulawayo. He was approached in March of this year by people like Buchangwa, to discuss. We're going to have a coup sometime, right? We're planning this thing. It's going to happen. We don't know when, we don't know how, we don't know what the spurring moment is going to be. But he was also involved in another coup in 2007, which failed. He never went to jail. One general who was accused of leading that coup in 2007 was killed, put in his car, the car was smashed up, the car was put on a railway track, and the news story said that he was killed in a railway accident. Two other generals were killed with a lethal injection, and they were declared national heroes the next year, and the next year they were given post-mortem, whatever you call it, big awards. And this is just a kind of signpost. There's been a lot of efforts to have these coups going back to 2003. So this military faction has been really, really worried by the whole economic crisis that was happening with post-1999, post-2009 reform. And they have good connection with the old white guys who are in security. So they've been trying for a long time to get rid of Mugabe, but good old Grace and good old Jonathan gave them the opportunity. We had, I'm going to skip through this one. Okay, so November 4, something like that. Grace Mugabe has been going to all of these rallies, these interface youth rallies, with to get support for the election, which is coming up in the middle of this year, right? July to August sometime. And she insults Mnangagwa, unbelievable. This guy is a snake, and his head needs to be hit, and we need to throw him out. And she would even challenge Mugabe on the stage at these youth rallies. And the youth, by the way, were press gagged from school. So you're a kid in school, you're attending school, the youth militia come to you and force you onto a bus, and you go to these rallies. And then you hear Grace in a very unladylike African mode, not fitting the stereotypes of what a good Shona woman should be, just throwing venom at Mnangagwa, the Lacoste group, and challenging Mugabe to name a new vice president at that time. Remember, there's a ZANU-PF extraordinary conference which was slated for December. And so the G40 group was trying to get a new slate in front of this Congress. So Grace is pacing, going to church rallies in white robes, and finally, at a Bulawayo rally around the 1st of November, Mnangagwa's youth go there and start chanting at Mugabe. Grace Mugabe, start moving. So Emerson Mnangagwa is fired by Bob, and he likes telling the story of how he escaped. He jokes now he's a border jumper. There's probably 3 or 4 million Zimbabweans who have been border jumpers and all over the place, right? So he's out of the country. And there were 3 strategies for this coup. All right? The first category was Chiwenga on November 13. After he comes back from China,
and the police are going to arrest him. Mugabe sent him to China. He didn't go to China to talk to the Chinese about the coup, which the British newspapers were saying. I think it was a feint by the British newspapers, but I'm a conspiracy theorist. They were trying to say, yeah, he's talking to China. But if you're a conspiracy theorist like me, you say, no, he's talking to the British. So Chiwenga comes back on November 12th or 13th, and the police unit goes to the airport to arrest him, but the army, because the police units are part of the Generation 40 faction, the Jonathan Moyo, the Grace Mugabe faction. The police go to arrest him. However, the army knew about this. Their intelligence was very good. You had conflict between the military intelligence and civilian intelligence. The army goes to the airport and rounds up the airport workers and says, could we borrow your uniforms? So they go out to the airplane with airport uniforms on, and they make sure the army doesn't get there. Meanwhile, the army is surrounding the airport anyway, so the police don't have a chance. So they stop the arrest. Chiwenga is very angry, and this is where I understand from various stories people were telling me. I was there a couple of weeks ago, or mid-January. This is where the more than the one death may have happened. When the army went to the support unit of the police, which was the most highly best equipped and so on near Jikurubi prison, there might have been 11 to 19 people killed there. The one death we know about in the media was an Israeli security guard at the Minister of Finance's house, where there was apparently $15 million. And then, what did they do with that when they found it? So that was plan one. We do the military coup. Plan two was to get people in the streets, to make it look like a popular, ground-up revolution, right? So that's where you get, and you had thousands and thousands and thousands of people on November 18th. And the war vets arranged that. And the war vets had been hoping to, with the masses, to go right to State House and actually get inside. But the soldiers stopped them. So you see this slight tension between the soldiers and the military. And the plan C was impeachment through Parliament. So the MDC Secretary General, I'm not sure if it was Douglas, he was approached by Paul Mangwana to chart out the strategy to use parliamentary impeachment to get rid of Mugabe. If he hadn't retired, if he hadn't resigned by Tuesday the next week. Okay? If you want to see the film that really gets into the relationship between Mangwana and Manzora, see that film, The Democrats, which is really an interesting film about the public consultations for the constitutional process 2010 to 2013. All right, so, but what really happened alongside of these plan 2 and plan 3, plan 1 was Chiwenga comes in from the airport, and the next night he has a press conference. And he says, well, Robert, he didn't use that language. He says, well, Robert, you're surrounded by criminals, you're surrounded by purgists, you're surrounded by foreign puppets. Get rid of them and let us come back. Let Mugabe come back. Right? So that's the offer, and the offer is refused on Tuesday, the next day, the 14th. Chiwenga goes to the Politburo to discuss this with Mugabe, and the bunch says, no, you're treasonous. We're not going to do it. So that's when the real military thing starts to happen. The personnel carriers go to the street, they go to the Blue Roof House, they start arresting the cabinet ministers in the new government, the G40 cabinet ministers, and so on. So that's when the coup really happened. There was a chance if Mugabe had said, okay, I resign, would it have been a coup then? I don't know. So what do they do next? Well, this is when they have to go to the party. So they went to ZANU-PF party, and almost overnight, the whole membership, which had been transformed a week ago to a totally G40 supporting membership, kind of overnight becomes a Lacoste membership, and they vote Mugabe out of the party, right? They vote him, they say, we're finished. And so there was a press conference on that Sunday night, which I guess was the 12th or something. And there's this long rambling speech. Oh yes, we've had our generation problems. We're very glad that this has been drawn to our attention. I was at a TV studio watching it, waiting for it to finish, and I was almost falling asleep. Because it gets, media people work hard. When you get in the media buzzing, you're just buzzing all over the place. And the announcer is saying, he's not going to resign. He's not going to resign. He didn't resign. After being pushed, elected out of his party after seeing a coup. So no, I'm not going to say, bye-bye, we'll see you at the extraordinary summit, at the extraordinary congress in December. And the plan for that congress has been to add a third vice president to the roster. Mugabe would still be alive. You have a third vice president. You had a second vice president for a long time anyway, because when ZANU-PF killed thousands of people in Manabele land and ate up the other party, the ZAPU party, they would have one vice president, right? So you had one vice president from the old ZAPU party, and you had one vice president who would then become the next president. They wanted to have a third vice president. That third vice president would have been Grace Mugabe. And the new vice president would have, instead of Mugabe, because he presumably had been having to take refuge in the Michelangelo Hotel for the rest of his life, he would have been out, and there would have been another guy in who was also clearly linked with the defense ministry and so on. A doctor by the name of Sekarama, very quiet guy. That was the plan. That's why they had to get Mugabe out pretty quickly. So Grace was pushing that moment of decision very quickly, right? But of course it failed because they didn't have the military involved. Jonathan Moyle and that gang believed ideology, believed politics would work. But politics is intricately involved with the gun. So, Mugabe's under house arrest in this huge blue roof mansion. A couple of the cabinet ministers who were with him escaped to the blue roof mansion. Grace Mugabe is in the blue roof mansion. I think they'd sent a few SMS messages out, but clearly intelligence was not really on top of this stuff. It failed. The acting director was driving to the house while this was going on, and he got stopped by the armed forces, beaten up, and I think he was stripped almost naked and so on. They obviously got the presidential guard as well. So there they are, they're negotiating. There's the secretary, permanent secretary of information sitting there, there's the priest sitting there. Kenneth Kaunda comes down and cries a lot and says, oh, come on man, your time is great. Plays his guitar. The priest was there. So they're all sort of negotiating. When are you going to go, Mugabe? Come on, let's do it, let's go. Then there's that big demonstration on the Saturday, and then the impeachment process starts to unroll. However, before the impeachment process got underway, there was a cabinet minister called, and only one, a cabinet meeting called, and only one person showed up. So I think that's what made Mugabe decide. The show was over. And at one time the South Africans came up, they sent a few ministers out, because of course the big thing is if this was too clearly a coup, SADC and the AU are not supposed to like coups anymore, right? So they're supposed to send in a standing army. Well, where was the headquarters of the SADC standing army, which doesn't really exist anyway? It was in Harare, right? So they had to avoid this at all costs. SADC had to avoid this being called a coup. So, after Mugabe, what? That's what this seminar is supposed to be about. Well, he ain't no Ramaphosa, that's for sure. Mugabe is not a Ramaphosa. He's claiming to be open for business. He's claiming to be this foreign investment friendly guy. All the discourse of, if you want to call it neoliberalism, I guess that's what he says. But, oh yes, and of course, one of the famous novelists in Zimbabwe, maybe some of you read her work, Patina Gapa, she helped organize the lunch with the Financial Times. So has Ramaphosa had a lunch with the Financial Times yet, Roger? That's pretty good. Not a crocodile. So, you know, we have this new regime supposedly coming in, and we're going to compensate the white farmers for the land that's been stolen. One white farmer was actually given his farm back after it had been taken away. That was huge overpayment. My taxi driver in Harare, in the month between the end of November and the 6 weeks, and this is just a lowly taxi driver, he was driving around 10 former Rhodesians, 10 white Zimbabweans who were in exile for, 40 years, coming back to check things out. Because they had some businesses which had been lying dormant, and some of them had farms. And that's, there were lots coming back. And there's lots of consultants coming back to build roads and build dams and do all this sort of stuff. I'm not quite sure what the human rights NGOs are doing, but we can talk a bit about civil society later. The one family that sticks in my mind, it was a family of a couple of probably about 50, 55, 60, going around town, having the taxi driver take them to the nicest places, houses, shopping malls, all of that sort of stuff. Come on back from London, kids, it's a great place. You don't want to stay in London. So there is this outreach to foreign capital and to whites. And one of the important names to watch is Colonel Van Dyck, D-Y-C-K, who, former Rhodesian guy involved in the Coup Wars and involved in the 2007 coup and the 2003 coup, probably closely related to this coup. So, all right. So that's the sort of economic rhetoric that is going, except command agriculture is what Mnangagwa has been doing for the past 2-3 years. What is command agriculture? It's not neoliberal agriculture. It's subsidizing the production of maize so that it costs the state about 2.5 times the market rate what farmers produce. So is this an indication of neoliberal market policies? No. Mnangagwa was apparently a great fan of Deng Xiaoping, and the four modernizations in China. So people are saying he's moving towards a Beijing consensus. And one hears from the offices in London and so on, oh yes, Paul Kagame, maybe Emerson Mnangagwa was another Paul Kagame. Soft authoritarian. But I'm not sure if you have that sort of puritanical, whatever you think of Paul Kagame, there is that sort of puritanical business military type thing, which doesn't seem to be what you see in ZANU-PF. These guys, these military guys, are the guys who got really rich with the mines in the DRC, in the Rwanda DRC. And you can find it in the United Nations reports, it's all over the place. And so then they would use that money to set up private schools and build the big houses, some transport industry, but not a lot of productive capital in that sense. Although you do hear words about reindustrialization. And there are actually, a friend of mine who works in one of these think tanks about industrialization, and he says there have been a lot of technocrats coming from that regime very quickly, before Christmas, to think about what reindustrialization you can do. The infrastructure is kind of there, really intelligent workforce, half of them is around the world, various places. How do you attract, a young guy in Australia who's been beaten to an inch of his life in 2002 or something as a university activist, has all sorts of connections to the United Nations. How do you track them back? So this is, so what's going to be one of the polls will be free and fair elections. Mugabe was promised free and fair elections. Well, is the military, even if he wanted free and fair elections, would the military, if they fear losing, let go of this massively, intricately articulated apparatus that's been developing since 2002, at least? A combination of lots of intimidation, massive killings in the 2008 election, lots of cheating, all sorts of funny stuff. Nobody's quite sure what this electronic registration business is all about. There seems to be room for cheating. People aren't registering very quickly. There seems to be a lot of apathy. So we'll see. So what happens to the opposition after Mugabe? How does the opposition look? Well, Morgan Tsvangirai's greatest failing, and he had many. I'm just trying to figure out when he lost it. Anyway, that moment up till about 2004 was pretty good. He did not allow the party to elect a new leader. He just let it. He knew he was going to die in 2016. He had colon cancer. Anyway, pretty tired. He lost a lot of elections. You should let go of that. The party, after the 2013 elections, many people split off anyway. These are the people who are still in the party. So Kazani Coupe was actually elected in 2014, I think, or 2015, to be the vice president. But Morgan Tsvangirai selected 2 more people to be acting vice presidents as he was sick. The former mayor of Harare and Nelson Chamisa. Nelson Chamisa is the youthful, he's 40 years old, he can speak like he is a preacher. He's also very rich, he's got rich through his political life. He's the guy. He had a national council meeting soon after Tsvangirai died, and they said, okay, you are the acting vice president, and they're not going to have a Congress until after the election. Right? So he's going to be there for a long time. He said yesterday there were 20,000 people at this rally for the MPs. He also said at a rally last week that Trump had promised, did anybody see this? I forget the number, but he said at this rally in Mutare that Trump had promised billions to Zimbabwe if the MDC won the election. Trump has actually made a statement, probably his first statement ever about Africa, except when he thought it was Namibia. He said, we will support anybody who wins a free and fair election. So that's how to get him to respond. I'll say that I promise you something. So Chamisa is not that well respected in the structures of the party. He tends to alienate people. They do have an alliance of parties which were formerly part of the MDC. They have reformed as an MDC alliance. They have to decide, okay, you're in the MDC-N, you're in the whatever. Are you going to give up your seat if it looks like the alliance together will win the seat? They have to negotiate this sort of stuff. And there's lots of sort of antagonisms. Anyway. And of course there are lots of rumors, as Brian Godor puts it, when we come and getting there. But you're not telling me. The speaker at the last meeting I was at put it this way. He said, there are lots of alliances which are being made which are not party alliances. In other words, there are ethnic alliances coming up. And it could well be that Chamisa and Mugabe are in the process of coming to an agreement about either, if the elections look like they're going to be messy, if the military kind of, makes things look messy, cancel the elections and have a government of national unity, or if the elections are messy and Chamisa doesn't make much noise about the elections, he will be allowed to be the leader of a very loyal opposition, and there'll be all sorts of trade-offs. So all of these rumors are going on around what kind of deals are going to be made between Mugabe and Chamisa. Don't forget that as this coup was unfolding, a lot of people, probably a majority of analysts and certainly the British, I was with the British at the time, this is going to be a government of national unity. So that was the word going out, and people like the former finance minister who was an NDC guy in the government of national unity from 2009 to 2013, he says, yeah, I'll come back. The war veterans had approached the leader of ZAPU, a famous war veteran, the most sort of senior elder statesman, Chamisa Zimbabwe, they had approached him. If we have a government of national unity, would you be the vice president? But that didn't happen, he didn't agree at the end. So there was also the talk going on about a government of national unity. Because the West, let's put it that way, the West thought, well, we're not going to have free and fair elections anyway, so let's have 3 to 5 years and we can actually prepare the conditions for a good free and fair election in a few years. And everybody was saying, even well before this coup, that these elections are not going to be worth thinking about anyway. Talk about 2023, when this new generation will sort itself out. And there was also sort of indications, I think, that there could have been a nice package of developmental aid coming into play, that the Chinese and the British could lead together. But of course, none of that happened. If there were ever any promises made by Mugabe, okay, we can have a coup, we'll have a GNU, and he didn't promise. Okay, we are rounding up, I think. Economic policies, elections, opposition parties. Oh yes, yesterday a new party was formed, made up of Grace's old friends in the G40. This guy is one of the eminence grise, 44 years old, the nephew of Robert Mugabe, former student of my partner, who teaches at this school of governance. And he's very radical. Indigenization, his wife's getting them out, but they soon turned. And there's the new leader of the new party, a ZANU PF MP, former Zebra war veteran, commander. He has started up the new Patriotic Front officially, as of yesterday. And he will go and meet Mugabe to get his blessing. And that indicates the splits. Aside from the military war veterans and civilian splits in the ZANU-PF, there are more ethnic splits. So this party just might take the Zulu vote in the Mashonaland area, or those people will vote. And apparently somebody was, 2/3 of the parliamentarians in parliament are actually not supporting the coup. So I think I'm finished.
Great.
Sorry for going on.
Thank you so much, David. I was trying to signal to wrap up just because there's so many things to talk about. And I know we always have people in the crowd who like to talk, which is part of our mission.
Even more than I like to talk.
That would be hard, but I think you would find some competition. Normally what we do is we ask people to just briefly introduce themselves, name, number, and I think in the interest of time we have to finish around 20 minutes past to clear the room up for those who come after us. So I'll ask for questions. I may take 2 or 3 at a time, and then if you can keep an eye on the clock as well, so I don't have to cut you off. Who would like to start? Yes, please.
J. Brian Scott, frequent guest lecturer at the University of Ottawa. So it's a dog's breakfast. Who's in charge? And will any election solve half of these problems?
Do we do one?
Yeah, let me just to make sure we get all the
Okay,
questions
yeah.
out there. I will take 2 at a time to start, and then I saw Peter first.
Just quickly, Peter Henshaw, I work for the government, but also a historian of Southern Africa. I'm quite interested in the whole relationship between Chiwenga and the military to the election, and the election relationship to how it runs in ZANU-PF? In other words, will the military be loyal to the project of keeping Mnangagwa's group in office? Or do you see any splits within the military now that Chiwenga is no longer head of the defense force, and Sabanda, who everyone's always said is much more interested in being more professional? Is that going to mean anything? Or is it just going to be military going through its proven track record of organizing and winning elections, and really not looking for any problems until maybe the subsequent election?
Do you want to take those two, David? We'll take two more.
Sure. Henry Kissinger is famous for saying the reason academics fight so much is because the stakes are so low, and he's famous for saying power is the greatest aphrodisiac. But in January 1977, when he was handing over the ropes to Cyrus Vance, and they had just finished the Geneva Conference, which was trying to sort out who was a leader, and he says this is like the Harvard faculty. So things haven't changed that much. And that's why I often retreat in my political theory to these long durée analysis of pyramid accumulation and the formation of capitalist relations of production. So maybe the peasants who got the land in 2000, there's 150,000 peasants, do they turn into an entrepreneurial yeoman class, and do you have all these sorts of class struggles going on that actually start with an agrarian revolution, which was postponed because of racial segregation? I don't know, and then there's this conjuncture, the 1990s economic structural adjustment created the mess that a trade union-based political party could pick up on and mount an opposition. Who's in charge? The World Bank, IMF? No. I think this is where the politics of the moment, and you see, the sort of debates that Peter is looking at. You see if over the next election, next 6 months, if Mnangagwa is forced into a more democratic mold, and if he's forced to deal in whatever sort of underhanded ways with the MDC to at least have basic formations of elections there, that could be interesting. That could actually, one of the points I made in one of my pieces about the fact that the way in which this coup was kept so soft is because a lot of democracy has been inputted into the system over the past 2 decades. People in the streets, civil society, the parliamentary process, those were all mechanisms that had to be brought into play because the military option was actually, they didn't want to be pushed that far, right? So I think if Mnangagwa is careful, and remember also that a lot of aid is going to be riding on, and even SADC has said long-term observers should be there just to see the whole process, but no, SADC's not going to pay for it. You need 6,000 people really to do a good job of observing elections, and to have them there for 4 months, who pays for that? I remember being there for the 2000 election, and all the Namibian observers were paying in US dollars. They were being paid by. Anyway, so you either you get that, or apparently there was a handshake made. This sort of gets into Peter's question too, and I'm probably talking too long already. There was a handshake made between Chiwenga and Mnangagwa in 2008. In 2008, ZANU-PF lost the presidential election by probably 52 to 56%, but the counting went to 48% for Shangarai. So they had to have a runoff election. The runoff election, Mugabe was apparently ready to quit, but the military said, no, you stay with us. And at least 200 MDC people were killed, thousands of people were burnt out of their homes, and So apparently Mnangagwa and Chiwenga made this handshake at that time. And they said, when this bloody coup finally happens properly, Mnangagwa, you'll get it for 1 term. Chiwenga, I'll get it the next term. Mnangagwa could be 80. It's not that healthy. So it might happen anyway. And when Damiso Debego was asked to be the vice president, well, the second request was, well, maybe you can be vice president in the second term. And he wouldn't go with Chiwenga. He said, no, I'm going to be too old, I'm going to retire by then. So that kind of feeds into Peter's question, will the military be loyal to keeping Mnangagwa in office? I don't see why they wouldn't so far, because this maintains the idea of a professional military, maintains the idea that there is democracy, more aid will come in. Unconstitutionally, Chiwenga is the vice president and the minister of defense, which came later. So he didn't want to be just vice president, he still wanted to have his handle on the military. So even though he's not the commander-in-chief, he's the minister of defense, which Mnangagwa was for many, many years as well, right? So, you know, I don't know that much about the criminology of the military in power now. Shiri, who's one of the participants in the Gukurahundi killings, is Minister of Agriculture now. The Vice President, Mohari, is well known for his Gukurahundi activities. I think he was actually in prison for a while and tortured. And intelligence. So you do have a top-heavy military structure. The civilian intelligence people have been kind of sidelined. The Moyo people. So the CIO will have to be rebuilt, I guess. How's that for criminology?
Sounds good to
Okay.
me. I saw two questions over here. Yes, wait.
So Roger Self.
Yeah, oh, okay. Yep, you go first.
Oh, sorry,
Good.
David, Grace's lot called themselves Generation 40. Do you want to just tell us why they chose that name? Was there any substance to this notion that they were a younger generation waiting to take over? Just take us around this notion of people waiting for the old guys to go.
Yeah, Jerry Schmidt. In all these messy, chaotic maneuverings at the top that are still ongoing, it appears, I'm not even clear that the Mugabes are completely out of the picture from what you were saying in your last remarks. So what are we looking at a really fundamental, lasting regime change that will bring concrete improvements for the average Zimbabwean? I know there are all these factions and strategies and where's the MBC going, et cetera, and all these characters. It's quite a rogues gallery to outline. Can the long-suffering average Zimbabwean really say, okay, this is a real substantive change and we're going to be better off because...
Yeah. I skipped over the generational stuff to a large extent, Roger. But yeah, they were basically, a lot of them were people who were not war veterans. So Jonathan Moyo is 60-something now. He was trained for a while as a guerrilla soldier in the late or mid-70s, but he ran away. And he's in his 40s. They weren't veterans. And that's also one of the reasons why the military didn't like them. Because the military had said many times, we will never salute a person who wasn't a veteran. But it was interesting the way in which Jonathan Moyo would hire music bands, and radio stations were flooded with Zimbabwean content, and these rallies that the youth would come to. So many of the youth intellectuals have been beaten up so badly they're in exile. Very few of them are coming back. A few of them are coming back in interesting ways. You know, some lawyers in South Africa, some political scientists coming and quite closely involved in the MDC. But what was worrisome to me, and this also brings in another dimension, is at a meeting in January 11th, there was a meeting at a think tank about Gukurahundi,
Because Mnangagwa has said we will have a reconciliation commission, and there's already a parliamentary commission going on. So there was this think tank meeting about Gukurahundi. And this guy, Chuboy, destroyed the meeting, and another guy beside him, and actually 6 or 7 others. They just destroyed the meeting. There was a Zimbabwean woman there who's been a key actor in remembering Gukurahundi in civil society, who's married to the former Speaker of the House of South African Parliament. They said, you, South African, what can you come and tell us about, justice and freedom? And then they tore the meeting apart. Now, and this is also a question about civil society. This guy used to be president of the Zimbabwe National Union of Students. And in 2010, there was a huge dispute in civil society about whether they should support this constitutional process or not. He was on the side which did not support the constitutional process. He said, no, it's a bad constitution. So he lost, he would never get a job again with civil society. He would never get a job with civil society. So he moved to ZNPF. And now he's what I call the lumpen intelligentsia, with reference to a very nice article in the London Review of Books about one of the Daily Mail journalists or something. So you do have this kind of lumpen intelligentsia in youth and the new generation who are floating around. Where are they going to get there? And civil society is in a tenuous situation now because they supported the opposition party for far too long. They're regrouping, but it'll take a while before you get a civil society which really can push not apolitical, but a non-party political agenda, and go into the issues of social justice and human rights, whatever the interconnections are between them. So I'm a little bit worried about this new generation which has stayed, this new generation of intellectuals. And the youth militia. So they had these national service schools which they kind of pick orphans up off the street who were begging and put them in the school, and they become thugs, the green bombers, the militia. So and I think your waiting kind of thing comes out of South African experience too. I think everybody's waiting. Why do they wait so long for Zuma to go? Why do they wait for these moments? And that, one of the political scientists in Zimbabwe said, this is traditional culture. These old guys stay forever, and it takes a long time to develop a culture in which this is not seen. It took me about a week to write an obituary on Morgan Tsvangirai, because people in newspapers and media prepare their obituaries before people die, right? 2/3 to 75% of the people I called or WhatsApped who were involved in the ABC said, he's not dead. We can't say anything. And, and that with all my being honest about obituary, and that took me a long time. So I think these generations, there's all the historical stuff about Mata Rebellion, the generational rebellions in Zimbabwe in the 70s, in the camps, ideological, and then there was an ideology that the young generation could push against these old guard people. I mean, there was Marxism, there was Maoism, there was Soviet-style socialism. What are the ideologies now? Feminism, environmentalism, liberalism, and there's no working class left. The working class has been absolutely decimated since 2002. And the Leo Panishes of the world and the Manfred Fred Binefelds are kind of saying, how can we have social democracy? We need another social democracy. Well, how do you have social democracy without a strong working class? Because our sort of left-wing thinking is tied into that whole thing, and even in the West. So don't despair. The rogues are in North America. The rogues are in the Republican Party.
What's the inflation rate right now?
Inflation rate right now is quite low, I think, isn't it?
I reckon it's about, I was being told it's about 250 to 300 people I mean, that's low in Zimbabwe.
It could be, and people are already losing patience. Nothing's happening with the economy. The currency has not been changed.
Well, this is my bottom line question. Who benefits? Did we see all this, these maneuvers? Who benefits?
Well, yeah, that's a good question.
Tim had a question as well.
And it relates to the latest this stage in the debate, you were at Carlton and Richard Saunders tried to sort of explain the current informal economy, particularly around mining. I'd be interested in your comments on that. And the one you mentioned, which I think was hardly mentioned at the weekend, in terms of Southern Africa, were diasporas. And obviously the longer, obviously there are stages, there are generations of diasporas, but the longer the diasporas are in the diaspora, presumably the less likely it is that they will return in any meaningful way. But they're huge.
Yeah.
And if they haven't started coming back, that's also
Well, I think that the answer that's coming back is the whites, hoping that they'll have their world come back. A soft authoritarian state, access to all sorts of capital. People who are going back, the consultants they're going to set up plans to fix the roads, and get the electricity going. The Transnet is now arranging passenger cars. Mining companies, I'm sure the Canadian mining companies are there. The Mnangagwa people have concessions over a lot of historical gold veins, which Cecil Rhodes was looking for, but didn't think were good enough. Maybe the technology is better now. I don't know, is there a commodity boom that's going to attract, it's kind of a global thing, isn't it? Does the DRC get too messy, and so these are kind of diaspora things. The MDC has never been really good at pushing for the diaspora vote. Apparently there's no real big push on now for the diaspora to vote. Martin Rupia, who's a former Rhodesian soldier but is now sort of a consultant on strategy and military affairs, he's often at these meetings to discuss these things. And, as the coup was happening, he said, well, the UN has a fund. And if the regime and the UN can get together, they can get millions and bring back the technocrats and pay them lots of money. But I think a lot of that rides on legitimacy, which rides on a free and fair election, or one that appears to be free and fair, or one that the MDC doesn't complain about. So maybe there is a moment of some sort of transformation. So, 90% of the economy, 90% of the economic actors are informal. Now they are organizing. So is this a force in civil society which is equivalent to the working class? Well, a lot of these young guys graduating from university latch on to or create an informal sector NGO and kind of take over, and they become an NGO like any other NGO. And all the problems with NGOs these days. Artisanal mining, yes, that comes and goes. And the artisanal miners have been linked in intricate networks with these key political actors, tied up very, 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 very closely. I remember I was once interviewed by the CNBC, which is a kind of, from Lagos, and all they were interested in was investment. Well, I said, you've had some pretty interesting investment with the Chinese coming in the Anjin Corporation and the Marangi mines and all sorts of really nasty stuff. What kind of investment are you talking about? So, what's out there in terms of sources of capital? I don't know. And the South Africa claims its ACT UP. Is it all going to go down to South Africa? South Africans have been involved in many ways, the mining sort of semi-informal. There's kind of a, 3 levels. There's kind of a middle informal, and there's lots of activity. There has been for the past, all during the previous years. There's been lots of those sort of semi-informal, middle informal actions, activities going on in the mining sector, and the state, I think Parliament has created lots of interesting legislation, actually, on formalizing those ones. Lots of interesting legislation about health and all sorts of stuff, but it never gets implemented. So if Mnangagwa can get the Paul Kagame Deng Xiaoping discourse going there, and he talks all about how people are going to have to work. They're going to have to work hard. How many times does he use that word? Because the civil service hasn't been used to working for a long, long time. They do other things. So
get a good question.
I think so. I think,
9 text news.
yes, I think we are going to wrap it up, but just before we do that, before we thank David, I'm just going to mention a couple of other things that is going to happen at SIPS over the next couple of days. So we're having a sort of period of, I feel it's a period of hyperactivity at the Center for International Policy Study. There's, if you haven't had enough, there's another SIPS event this evening at 5 o'clock. Which is on a very different topic. It's called Elon Musk, President of Mars, ? It's about the politics of outer space, and it's by Professor Michael Byers from UBC. Then, perhaps more of interest to people in this room, tomorrow morning at 9, we have an event with a speaker from the Africa Division of Human Rights Watch. It's on South Sudan. So we have one of the researchers from Human Rights Watch who's just back from his investigations in South Sudan, so that should be really interesting. And then final thing I will mention, we are also celebrating the 10th anniversary of SIPS this week, and one of the ways in which we're doing that is with an event on Wednesday evening, which is the evening of, on the eve of International Women's Day. So we have 5 High Commissioners and Ambassadors who are all women. The High Commissioner from Britain, Australia and Rwanda. Yes, it's the High Commissioner now because they're members of the Commonwealth. And then the ambassadors from Germany and France. And the theme of that panel is Disorder, Disruption, Directions, a New Era for Global Diplomacy. So we're talking about women in international diplomacy, but also just the current international environment. So you're warmly welcome to that. It's at 6 o'clock on Wednesday night, and it should be a great deal of fun. That discussion is moderated by Madeleine Drawhan, who's Canada, or the Economist's correspondent in Canada. So that's SIPS. Today I think we've had a fantastically rich discussion, tremendously interesting, and I think what I said in my introduction, that there are not many people who can rival David when it comes to knowledge about Zimbabwe. I think he demonstrated that, proving me right. It's not often I get proved right, so thank you.
Glad to help.
Thank you so much, David, for a fantastic talk, and safe journey back. You will make the taxi?
Yep, I'll make it.